Let me now move into the concept on moment of need. Now, some of you may be familiar with moment of need, right? And this is a concept that many people talk about, especially in the current COVID pandemic situation, where we are very clear that sometimes we need to make sure that we learn just in time for application. Now, why is that so? Let's look at some of the arguments, right? So I borrowed this chart from a publication that looks at the modern employee experience, right? The modern employee experience is very different from the past. The baby boomers, during their period of employment, had a fairly consistent path to build upon the technology, right? And technology grow probably not as fast as it is today, right? You go to a training class, you find that that training will be applicable for a longer period because technology doesn't catch up just as fast. But in the modern work environment, the whole space is complicated by many different technology and rising expectation of your end customer, perhaps your consumers, right? And the competition in terms of the platform that is made available. So this complex diagram that you see here, right, is what potentially the current modern worker faces, right? And I don't need to go through the entire diagram to share what is to be dealt with, right? From I guess on the right hand side, look at the automation of tactical tasks, right, to the incoming gig economy and its threat on the job roles. The whole aspects of looking at design thinking and how to deliver customer experience. From business managers, really how to ensure that your employees have got the right experience to support your organization, and so on and so forth, right? So when we send somebody to training, right, this is what we see, okay? This is what we see, right? The question we ask is, are we sure that when we send somebody to a workshop, he or she becomes competent after the training, right? Good question. Are the learners who go to a workshop or training become competent immediately? So this graph shows, right, two different set of competency that can be derived, right? In attending a training, while we all hope that you can achieve the magical line of proficiency as depicted in this diagram here, we all hope that by the end of training, right, we can arrive in through the display of curve number 1, we'll arrive to that part where we are competent. But in real fact, all right, all of us know, whether you go to a 3-day training program, you go to a 2 weeks training course, or a program that lasts for 3 months, right? We will always fall short of the expected learning outcome, right? And there are many reasons for it: disruptions, retention of knowledge that you acquire, and so on and so forth, right? It is only when the person who's gone through the training goes back to work and applies some of the knowledge that it gets reinforced, and the skill level, the competence level goes up, right? So let's look forward and see what happens after this, right? While the expectation of proficiency in line number 1, curve number 1, continue to go up, there is a huge possibility, and we are seeing today, unfortunately, we don't have management in the team, but management are definitely seeing that, well, it takes a while before they achieve the proficiency level that is expected of them. And that's depicted by line number 4, right? And that is assuming that you have support, right? And support in the sense of being able to apply the knowledge you have acquired into your work environment. And if without support, the red curve, right, number 3 applies. Without support, it deteriorates. And over time, your competency drop to a level where it is lower than when you've completed your training. Now, let's reflect a little bit, right? How true is this? How true is this? For many of us who have attended training, you'll probably be nodding your head, or at least within your mind, you say, yeah, I remember those days, right? I remember those days. You attend a training, and before you know it, the functionality has upgraded itself. You apply, you go to an ERP product training, right? After you go through the training, 6 months later, there's an upgrade, new functionalities. A lot of things that you have learned may not be necessarily useful anymore. You need to relearn, right? Hence, this graph brings us to a point whereby we need to think very carefully, right? How we can help the learning process retain itself within the human. Very interesting question. So the moment of need is nothing but the expression that uniqueness of performance support can only be effective at the moment of need. HR department in planning for training, the whole concept around having a training budget and making sure somebody attends a class because you've got the money to spend may not produce the effective outcome if there is no moment of need, right? It is simply isn't acceptable to just throw learners to a classroom, right? Or e-learning for that matter, and then hope that by doing so, right, the person going through will magically become able to perform his task successfully, right? And we know it doesn't work that way, right? From past experience, right? And we all know that the learner doesn't necessarily stick to what he has learned unless you're put into a place the provision to provide the support and to reinforce that learning, right? So moment of need is a discussion around short knowledge acquisition, micro credentials that can support and reinforce knowledge acquisition through the point of need, and more importantly, during a point where you can reinforce that knowledge and it gets retained within the worker. So there are 5 questions we would ask, or 5 points of note in moment of need, right? When you're learning something for the first time, how much retention will you get? When you're seeking to learn about something because there's an urge for you to know something, right? The retention, of course, is higher. And then we're trying to apply what we learn, right? And adapt performance to the situation. The retention is a lot higher compared to the earlier two. It, of course, gets better when you take ownership and you try to solve a problem, right? Where you try to put in all the different components of the knowledge nuggets and try to apply them. And finally, you're able to use that knowledge and adapt and apply it when something changes. And that's where we become the master of that particular competency. Now, I would wish to ask the management that, how many times do we think about training in the following 5 ways? We definitely need the workforce, the team, to go to training for the first time. But how do you reinforce it subsequently to make sure that you retain the competency and it's able to contribute to the organization? So, having said that, let's now differentiate a little bit, right? Training is an activity. It's no more than just an activity. Do you want to look at a 2-hour training, 2-day training program, 2 weeks workshop, or a 5 weeks training program or more, right? And it doesn't equal to learning. The retention of a training activity is much less. Learning and being able to reinforce that is probably the best way. And sometimes OJT, on-the-job training, or learning on the job, is a better reinforcement to retain the knowledge. And of course, being able to eventually translate that into performance is what we are hoping to achieve. So you could ask me, what has all this got to do with AI? right? Why am I shifting gear from discussing AI technology, both narrow and general AI and all the different aspects of machine learning and reinforcement learning? What has it got to do with moment of need, right? Well, let's ask ourselves one question. You have heard people talk about this. Do you build an AI system or do you train an AI solution? Do you build or do you train? Why are we saying that machine learning? Why are we talking about deep learning or reinforcement learning in AI? Let's think about it. Well, simply put, we are trying to apply the aspects, the principles of learning to the AI application, right? And if moment of need is a very important principle that we will need to apply as we start to um, learn and create better performance. Aren't we talking about the same thing for AI as well? We want AI to be able to contribute to the performance of your organization. And if you build an AI because we hope to get something done and it takes a long time to build it, by the time you complete the process, the business scenario may have evolved, right? Um, if you were to build an AI system in 2019 and your completion date was supposed to be first quarter 2020, good luck. A lot of the efforts that you put in may have to be rethought through again because COVID changed the rule of the games. So training an AI solution must also align with the moment of need. And that's where I'm proposing we need to go ahead with. Well, the strong message I will put across, and Sir Peter Blake, who's an artist, British artist, said this: new technology is common. We're seeing many different forms of new technology available today. Every day we have a different function, a different capability in the smartphone, in the navigation systems, in the transportation system, medical care, and so on and so forth. But new thinking is rare. We are not catching up in terms of the human ability to augment technology. I'm going to throw the word differently now, right? Instead of technology augmenting human potential capability, we are not augmenting ourselves to technology, right? And AI has to be different. We need to treat AI, if we need to treat AI different from another technology. If we treat AI like just like another traditional IT, we're going to be dead meat, right? And honestly, we will be disappointed. That's my message to all of you. The changing nature of AI in our workplace, new advancements in technology, and the economic realities is going to make it a compelling need, right, for us to consider AI in performance support for the organization. As a result, in exploring AI projects, right, we need to look for the following. One, there has to be a commitment, right? The organization needs to say, I really need it, I want it. It's just like learning or training, right? Do you go for training because you have a budget, or do you go for training because there is a moment of need? Think about it, right? If you go for training because you need that skill, that knowledge, it becomes valuable, right? The return on investment is higher. Same thing. If you look at AI projects, because everyone is doing it, because there is a budget for it, right? There's no real commitment, right? Then going down the path of building or training an AI system is not going to cut it, right? We also need sponsors who not only have commitment, but also who actually know what they want. It has to be clear. You need to know exactly how this AI application is going to help in the nature of work that is existing today. Do not build an AI application because your neighbor is doing it, because your competition is doing it, right? You have to build an AI application because you know there's a gap in your workforce, in your current work processes that can be dovetailed by an AI application. Right? And eventually, most importantly, we want to make sure that the benefit goes back to the sponsor. The person who supports the project needs to get benefit, because that's where the ROI is visible and can be better realized. Right? And it's all so important that that's the case. Today, there are many discussions about engaging and starting up an AI project because it is the trend. It is not in the moment of need. So let's dive a little bit further, right? Let's dive a little further. There are 5 moments of need that I shared earlier. One is learning for the first time, eager and wanting to know more, right? We talked about that in an earlier slide. Then, of course, this is where we start to apply, right? Take the knowledge and apply into a workplace. Look at things that go wrong or things that change. How can we continue to leverage on the knowledge we acquired and put it in place accordingly, right? So in the moment of need, in terms of training, in terms of learning, these 5 moment of needs are important, right? And let's apply this to AI. Well, isn't it true that the first 2 is where you are AI unaware? Well, you do not know much about AI. You're not sure what AI can do and can contribute to your business or your organization. You could perhaps be learning it for the first time, and while we are wondering why you're doing it. So it opens up that window to appreciate a totally new space. And then curiosity builds up, right? So you want to know more. You want to appreciate more. So this is where you are in the space of AI unaware and moving towards AI aware. Right? Now you know something about AI, you remember what it is, and you try to look at what is possible to apply. You may experiment with your first project. You may try to look at from a small scale project to a larger scale project, and you build up from there. So AI unaware to AI aware. Okay, got it so far? Now let's refresh. If you recall, and one of the reasons why I requested for attendees to this particular workshop must have come from the previous workshops before, previous webinar before, because on the second webinar, we talk about AI accreditation and readiness. And one of the topics that was discussed is AI readiness. And in that particular session, we looked at AI unaware, AI aware, AI ready, and AI competent, right? And AI Singapore has built this metrics, this assessment that's able to determine if an organization fits into which bucket, right? And I think the 4 buckets rightfully captures where organizations are and how they want to explore AI. In the first place, if you're AI unaware, right, then it is important we try to understand what it is first before you jump into the bandwagon and try to build an AI solution. If you're AI aware, let's look at where a potential use can be. Let's explore, let's understand, and build up certain level of competency. Right? Of course, then we get into being a lot more ready, you're more capable, and eventually into an AI competent organization. Right? Now, it is not necessary so that the size of the enterprise or organization correlates with AI readiness. There are big organizations who today may still be totally AI unaware. There are startups who are AI competent because they know exactly where they are going, and their founders are competent, proficient in the technology of AI, right? And there are, of course, those in between, right? So I guess that first question needs to be discussed, and the application, the enabling of AI has to fit into the moment of need, right? And that's what I will emphasize again and again. Now, it is not necessary, like the professional, that everyone becomes AI competent. It is not necessary that all organizations need to be AI competent, right? You may come to a point whereby you are AI aware, you are able to adopt and consume some ready-made off-the-shelf AI solutions, right? And you are able to be satisfied because that serves your purpose, right? Unless there is a compelling reason for you to move further in this continuum to be AI competent, organization could well be comfortable and be able to apply AI just within the first two columns, right? So we don't need to be a completely sophisticated AI adopter because everybody else is doing. We have to understand the moment of need within your organization and how AI can benefit your organization. Bottom line, it has to boil down to the experience that you're driving within the organization, right? And by experience, many times organizations just look at the customer experience, right? And based on that, a lot of attention is pushed down to the fact that we want to build AI solutions to meet or enhance customer experience. But having said that, it is also important that we look at other stakeholders, including the employee experience and partner experience. Today, most organizations do not operate within themselves or by themselves, right? We know that organizations also work with partners. We must put together a operating model that can enhance not only the customer experience, but also the employee experience so that employee can perform up to a higher level. And more importantly, as we work with partners, it kind of ties in together as well, right? So the whole supply chain needs to come into discussion. I won't go into a lot more technical details of how that can be done and how the organization should be structured, right? In this suggestion, we talk about different levels of foundation and tools and platforms that needs to be built within the organization. I won't go into that, but the key point on the drive is that we need to look at the three experiences within the organization and how AI can supplement and support and enhance on those experiences. Now, let's now take a different cut on the AI experience, right? That this is a statement that was published recently this year in one of the magazine. Half the time when companies say they need AI, what they really need is a select clause by a group. Believe it or not, right? Believe it or not, I could take a poll and see how the rest of you feel, right? But I'll just go on and explain why this is the case. Let's take for example, right? If now you have a number of independent inputs, right? And you want you think a fancy machine language model that can be trained and built up, right? Maybe think again, can a simple algorithm work? So let's use this example, right? Let's say that you want to build the capability to predict whether someone who rents a bicycle in London, in this example, will return it in less than 10 minutes. And you think somebody who rents it on a weekend will probably rent it longer, and a quick ride is higher in the weekdays. There's a business problem, right? If you're in the bicycle renting business, right? You probably want to have this analytics in place, right? You probably want to be able to have AI perform this. Is it true? Right? Do I need to engage with an IT team supported by a number of AI scientists and machine learning scientists, engineers, who then now build this model, train it over 9 months, and come up with a solution to solve this problem? Or, guess what? This could well be a source code to provide that same result that we just talked about, right? If you have a spreadsheet of information, if you have collected the past 2 months of rental logs, right, on bikers who come and share bike and rent it and use it and perform it, this could be a source code that's able to achieve and answer the questions that was listed in the previous slide. Believe it or not, of course, if there are academicians inside here, there are researchers inside here in the audience, you may challenge me and say, hey, that's too simple. I fully agree. But what I'm trying to allude to is that sometimes we think we need the most sophisticated technology to solve a simple problem. And half the time, if I could repeat the statement, half the time that we think we need an AI solution, it can be simply done by a very basic source code. AI has become this big fanciful thing that everybody wants AI, but in actual fact, it is probably as simple as a database code that we put in place. And perhaps even using Microsoft spreadsheet, this could have been achieved by including macros into the discussion. So, what are the ways that human and artificial intelligence can be blended together to achieve this, right? So what is important for discussion really is the fact that humans and machines can work together in different ways, right? One is the ability to hand over from one party to another party, right? That increases productivity because we want to leverage on the strength of the human and the strength of the machine in performing the respective tasks. So, for example, getting a machine to do a lot more computation work, more search activities, whereas a human do a lot more analysis, thinking, curious questioning, and the fact that we want to explore how AI can eventually be a supporting or assisting hand to the human, right? Very important, right? It works both ways. AI and humans can come together in the moment of need, right? And more importantly, humans can help AI after the fact, right? How do we help the human beings understand that the only way machines can learn and get better is to provide input back into the system, right? And we all know that, right? You can build a system and the system makes an error or does not give you the right computation or you found a certain feedback. By the only way the system can improve and rectify itself, right, is where the humans feedback to the machine, to the system on ways to improve. Do not wait until you get a bug in the system and then you communicate back. You should always be able to feedback to improve on the quality of the AI system. So that brings us to the fact that we need to see AI as a co-worker, right? So this was published earlier this year with some of the results, some of the survey done by Gartner around how we should look upon AI as a co-worker, as an intelligent virtual assistant, less and less a standalone guru that's almighty and untouchable. So if it is a co-worker, the co-worker needs to be trained. The co-worker needs to be there in a moment of need, right? Both ways, for you and for you to feedback to the AI system. And if we look upon AI as a co-worker, and particularly a co-worker in the moment of need, that can improve your efficiency to the greatest possible level. So imagine now that we have a workflow process in place. And what we are seeing is that as a human, you can perform certain tasks. But at the same time, there are certain tasks you may be weak in, and that's where the co-worker steps in and supports you, right? And different humans may have different strengths and weaknesses. And the co-worker needs to be flexible enough to adjust himself or itself to dovetail into your strengths and weaknesses in order to perform a joint task more efficiently. So that's something we should really explore. Now, why now? Why do we need to talk about this at this moment? Well, number one, everything is connected, right? And data collection is quite easy to capture. Secondly, whether it's structured or unstructured, data today can be unified as knowledge and highly applicable, right? And thirdly, with the decreasing cost in computing power, machine learning has become very affordable, and possible to make happen. So with those three reasons, right, we need to see AI in a different light as a co-worker that can come in to support the human in performance at the moment of need. Okay, with that, I am going to pause again to stop share, and oops, I will stop share now, and I'd like to look at another survey, another poll in the group to better understand where we are coming from. So let me see. Okay, let me ask this question now. So again, take a minute to review the question and give me your answers, right? So just to bring everybody on the same page, the question I'm asking is, if you can become a power user of AI, or maybe another term with AI talent power user, would you consider to be one? Would you consider to be a power user of AI? So think through this, mull over it, and answer the questions. Someone may ask, what is the meaning of a power user? Well, I'll explain it in a while, but very briefly, do you all remember the days where we need to make a request for a report, or to require a new subsystem to be built, and we have to send this request order, right? This requisition order to the IT department, right? And the IT department tells you, well, there's a long queue, right? We'll come and service you 6 months' time. You will get your answer, your report in 9 months. It takes us 3 months to build it. And that frustration was there all the way until, guess what? Some of these office tools came into play, right? These office tools came into play such that you could do a lot more with your office tools, right? And I'm sure amongst you, very quickly, you will have thought about an office tool that's helping you achieve this, right? So the question is, if you can become a power user of AI, or an AI talent power user, do you want to consider being one, right? So far, the answers seem to be very positive. Everyone who has responded has given a firm yes. Nobody is saying maybe or not sure. So that's good to know. That's good to know. And probably some of you who are already power users of traditional IT are able to use office tools like spreadsheets, right? Excel. If you all remember the days where we have the Lotus 123, right? And you can use that to actually generate graphs and analytics. And in fact, I know of really powerful users who have used the spreadsheet to build a system around that, right? To actually input macros, to ask questions, to fill in information, and eventually build a system without having to worry about the queue in the IT department. So I guess the question we should ask ourselves is this possible with AI?